back to the Content That Grows podcast. Today, I am excited to be joined by Adam Goyette. Adam is the founder of Curtis.co, which works with growing startups to help them scale faster. He is the former senior marketing executive who previously led marketing at Help Scout and growth at G2. What's up, Adam? Thanks for joining today.
Yeah, how's it going? How are you?
Doing well. I'm excited to dig in today. We're going to be chatting about a few things that are all interrelated. So, one is understanding sort of the different stages of growth for startups, and the importance of understanding where you are in those stages. And then with that, kind of understanding, hiring in-house teams versus agencies, deciding which channels to bet on, when to hire VP. There's, a lot of stuff that kind of all rolls into that. So excited to chat through that today. And I guess, to get started, would love to have you give some of your perspective on what you think or kind of how you see some of the various stages of growth that most SaaS startups go through.
Yeah. You touched on a couple of things there, right? Where I think the reality is like you need product market fit first, right? And so there's kind of stages and evolutions within that. But I think the first thing is, one, do you have a product, right? Because there's lots of startups who don't even have the product yet. So once you have the product, let's just assume that's happened. Do you actually have product market fit? And product market fit to me is like, do you actually have customers, right? Like, do you have people who are using the product? Do you have people, when you talk to, if you're selling to marketers, do they get it? They're like, oh yeah, this is a definite thing. And then you can figure out pricing and all these kinds of things, but you need to kind of get to that product market fit. A lot of times that's just the founder selling, right? And I don't think you need marketing at that point. If you don't have product market fit to understand, like, what is it that they're buying? Why are they buying it? Who's actually buying it? Because a lot of times you go and talk to marketers, it's like, well, actually, I'm not really the one who would make that investment. That would be our ops team or whatever. And so suddenly it switches, right? And so I think it's really on the founder to do kind of founder-led sales or figure out that component. Maybe it's product-led, but you have to really have tons of conversations with people to get to that point. And I think once you have that, then it's kind of, like you said, figuring out the right channels. So like your product channel fit. Because it's a blessing and a curse if you're an earlier stage startup. You can do anything, which is an amazing feeling until you realize, like, oh crap, I can do anything. What do I actually need to do, right? It's like that experiment where you give people too many options and they kind of just freeze up. And so it's very similar to that. And so that's where I think you have product market fit, and then you have to figure out, where are we actually going to grow? Like, what are the things we want to bet on as a company? And there's lots of ways you can do it. And that's a lot of times where one way is like, that's where I get brought in a lot to help companies figure that out. And I'm not trying to like plug myself or anything, but you can work with outside people to come in, right? I know you've done that in the past before, where it's like, hey, help us shortcut this learning curve. And a lot of times what I do with people is it's kind of like you have to put limitations and constraints around it. So yes, you could do everything, but like the reality is you can't. So let's just stick with the B2B marketer example. You sell to B2B marketers, you have constraints, right? Like, are they really using Snapchat? No. Okay, like that's not the avenue, or at least they're not using it to engage with B2B marketing content. So maybe that's not the channel you're going to grow through. Maybe you're in a field where SEO is completely saturated. So like building out some giant content team isn't going to work, right? In that, and so like G2 is a good example of that. Everyone always says like, oh, G2 and their traffic and all this, and it's like people don't realize how far along G2 is. They've been around for 12, 13 years, right? They have a 40-person content team. Like, if you're an earlier stage startup that just got product market fit, you're not going to compete with them on SEO. Like, it's just not happening. Not unless you have like crazy funding or I don't even know how you would go about doing that. But so then it's like you do have constraints on the business. So applying those constraints helps you narrow in on the channels you feel good about. And then I think you have to work at it, right? I think it's identify what are those 2-3 channels you want to focus in on. And ideally, like, even to find the one is really what you're trying to do, right? Because once you find one channel that works, then it's about pouring gas on that and trying to scale that up. Once you get to a certain stage, at that point, you need to start expanding, right? Like, you can't, typically, you don't see companies just grow all the way from start to finish just through one channel, right? They start
Right.
diversifying, they start adding in events, and now we're going to do this next thing, and you build out more of a robust kind of playbook. So that's kind of at a, and there's lots of like stages within that, but like at a high level, I think those are like the three big buckets, right? Is like
Yeah.
the product market fit, and then you need to get to channel fit, and once you get to channel fit, you're trying to scale up. Once you start scaling, it's about like maintaining and expanding. Is kind of
Yeah.
the way I view it.
Yeah. That's cool. Yeah. I think there's, yeah. And if I were to like expanding is probably pretty, broad, I guess. And if I were to add one more from my experience is that like the, I feel like maybe, the revenue dollar amount is going to be different for everyone, but like in my experience, I feel like when we hit about 50 million, then it became like, this is not even just going to work as like inbound acquisition.
Yeah,
And, we had to have, agency partnerships. We had to have, outbound and growth within existing customer base and really like full revenue generating channels and
yeah,
like units of the business had to be
yeah.
layered on to really support and expand that. But yeah, I think you're right. Certainly, product market fit. I like the concept of the applying some of the constraints because it is true that you could do anything and everything, but you kind of making some of those educated guesses to narrow it down a bit. I think makes a lot of sense. And then if you are fortunate enough to get to the point of expanding, then yeah, I like your notes as well on needing to move beyond one channel and diversify there a bit. So
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm
yeah,
sure at, like Sprout and even at like G2, like partnerships and all those things, like the size of what they grow into, they're almost their own standalone business, right? Like they're their
totally.
own million
Yeah.
dollar kind of revenue stream for the company. So yeah, it's important to layer those out for sure.
Yep. Um, awesome. And then I think you know you maybe touched on it a bit, but I'd love to dig in a bit more. Just like as you come into a company to help them out, or even just sort of chatting with another marketing leader at a company, um, like what are some of the things you look for? Besides maybe product market fit's an obvious one, but like what are some things you look for to kind of get a sense of what stage the company's in to kind of know where to go from there?
Yeah. I think one is just analyzing their inbound funnel today to say like how are you getting leads? And so a lot of times with like founder-led sales and things like that, it's a little bit tricky because they have good growth early on, but it's all just their network, right? Like, and
Yep.
so the network starts to dry up, and then it's like, oh, we don't have any channels or we don't have any sprouts of growth. And so what I look for is like, where are there sprouts of growth that where you are getting traction on some things? Maybe you did a webinar, or maybe you did this one thing. It's like, oh, we actually got five customers out of it when we did that. It's like, okay, that there's something there then, right? And so I look for like
Yep.
where are there sprouts of growth. And then the other thing I do a lot of times is just look at the competition, right? Like you don't have to figure it out from scratch. If the competition, especially people who are more established, are already in a space playing,
Yeah.
it's generally because it's working for them. And not all the time, right? But like if 90% of the competitors you're going up against are all doing, whatever it might be, Facebook ads, like maybe your audience is on Facebook because like why would all of them be doing that, right? And
Yeah.
so, and not to say you have to run ads exactly the same way, but there's lots of creative ways you can go about making Facebook a channel for you. So those are kind of the ways I try to look at it to say like where is there opportunity and how do we just like shortcut some of that? Is look trying to find like yeah the sprouts that we have and then figuring out like where is that what is everyone else doing already and how do we go about doing it differently.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's good. I think it was shoot, I don't know if I remember this correctly. I believe I remember hearing that McDonald's spent like just millions and millions and millions of dollars to have people research locations of where to put the new McDonald's locations, and then Burger King spent zero and just put a Burger King wherever there was a McDonald's or something like that. So uh,
It's brilliant, yeah.
that comes to mind of like, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's always hard when you look at a competitor. You're like, they may just be clueless, and they may have a team that's going through the motions and spending and like
Yep.
reporting how proud they are of like all the MQLs, or you don't really know some of the details and sophistication. But yes, when there's quite a few folks there, like there's probably some opportunity that's worth at least testing that and whatnot. So
Yeah.
yeah, that
Yeah.
that's
And
great. I think. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think on the flip side, right, where uh, the companies who are getting it wrong early stage are the ones where they're not giving it enough time. Like, that's in
Yeah,
content. It's like people do like 5 blog articles and are like, what the hell? Like, we're not getting
yeah,
any leads, and
yeah,
it's like, turn it off. You have to give stuff time to mature and understand, like, also when you put those constraints on your business, what are the constraints? Is like, do you need leads today because you only have a 6 month runway? In which case, like, yeah, maybe some big brand play or doing all this branded content isn't like, what can you do today to get leads today is very different than a company with funding and a secure position that is willing to make longer term bets on some of these things. And so I
yeah,
think figuring out like not every channel is equal in terms of the return you get. Some take longer to mature. And I think having an understanding of that is another big component because too often you see that exact same thing where it's like, didn't work, we turned it off. It's like, well, how long did you do it for? 30 days. Or like we launched that Facebook ads and we turned them off because they weren't working. Well,
right,
what like variations do you? Can I see the ads? Oh, we just ran one set and then we turned it off. You didn't try to like optimize the audience. You didn't add new creative. You didn't do anything, right? Like so you kind of have to have like a little patience in terms of what you're building and then a game plan of how you're going to optimize it because like it's incredibly rare for anyone to be able to just launch something and have it work right out of the gate. It's all about the iterations to get to that point.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think it was Emily Kramer, I believe, who was on an earlier episode this year. I believe she was talking about managing marketing like a product, and sort of that to that same extent, like being willing to iterate, kind of understand what the customer needs, where's their friction, like all that stuff. I think plays really well into that.
Yep.
So we'll, I think, kind of start to transition a little bit into the team side of things. But first, I guess, in sort of that same lens of coming into a company, figuring out what stage they're at. How does like the current structure of the team, or like what roles they have in house, sort of like give some guidance to you of kind of where they're at, and like level of maturity, and where they're investing, and any of that? I think would be
Yeah.
a helpful place to start.
Yeah, so I think a big thing I see frequently is someone makes a decision before they even have channel fit on like this is the channel they're going to bet on, or, like as a founder, and they just hire a team of specialists, which I generally do not like at all, right? Because it's like you come in, you don't know yet, so it feels very odd to like pigeonhole growth into one thing that you're going to do, and it's like. And so I'm a big fan of earlier stage companies having like marketing generalists who can do a lot of things, right? They don't need to be the expert in everything, but can they get Facebook ads up and running for you? Could they work with a content agency to start producing content for us, right? Because a lot of times you come in and you're like, wait, why do you guys have 3 content writers, or why do you guys have 3 whatever paid specialists? And you're like, oh, because this is where we're going to bet. And it's like, okay, what results do you have to go along with that? And so a lot of times,
Yeah,
like that's what I see the most. I think specialists come once you figure out there's something to the channel, and
yeah,
then bring in the specialist and scale it up, right? And then you want to do that growth kind of piece. But early on, I love having just the generalist of who can just do a lot of things and want to experiment and play around. And it's a great learning opportunity for them because they get to be involved in all these different channels and all these different things. But generally, I think that's what I found is like people commit to specialists too early. And I think making a full-time hire like that is, it's a rough position to be in because like you're hiring someone and then it's like, oh, that's not going to be the channel for them, for you as a company. And then what do you do with that person? And not to say
yeah,
it won't be maybe in 5 years or 3 years or 2 years, but like in the immediate, you don't have that need. And so I think like people are too quick to commit to channels until they actually have something there. So I'm a
yeah,
big believer of like working with agencies, bringing like experts and not just like random agencies you go out and hire because there's just like hiring people. There's tons of bad agencies, tons of bad advisors and people like that out there. But like lean on your network to find out like, is there someone you could bring in to help you figure out what that is, right? And then I think you can make those bets a little bit safer.
Yeah. And would you agree that that happens a lot with like the first head of marketing, first VP of marketing as well, in terms of being very specialized? Like we're going to go find someone that has like they worked at this company or they had experience in this because we're making a bet on it, and then sort of the same fallout.
Yeah. What I find a lot of times is like usually you don't even need a VP of marketing that early on, right? I think
Yeah.
people jump to make a hire there too quickly. And what happens is like one of two things. One is you hire someone who's used to managing uh, like teams and budgets
Yeah.
and resources, and then you put them in with one other marketer, and you're expecting them to have the same impact, and it's like that's not their specialty, right? That's like
Right.
it's like getting a lab and then like living in a one bedroom apartment or a studio. It's like labs need to be outside and run and do all these things. Like that's what they're good at. So
Yeah.
like you've got the wrong dog, right? And so
Yeah.
you need someone I think who's maybe coming up in their career and maybe it's a director level or head of marketing, but who still does the work because early on in a startup, it's more about just getting the work done than anything else. Like the team that can use speed and execute fastest will get the best results. It's really
Yeah.
not much more than that. I think people overcomplicate it, but like we talked about, like finding the right channel. The way you find the right channel is like how quickly can you get through, the deck of cards to find the one card that's going to be for you. And if you're
Yeah.
taking weeks to plan it out and strategize and all this sort of stuff, like you're just shooting yourself in the foot. And so I think a lot of times companies make those VP of marketing hires way too soon. I
Hmm.
think once you have a couple of marketers and a few channels that are working, then you can layer in a VP of marketing. But generally, I like just having people who can just like get stuff done.
Yes. So three things I want to highlight that you talked about. Um, One is the what you were just saying. Like I kind of always talk to people about it as like the player coach um, model. Which I think that even as you get quite a bit bigger. I mean, I had maybe 12, 13 people on my team, and at that point it was VP level, and I still held sort of a player coach role. Much more coach at that point, but still a few areas that I kind of owned. I would own projects, like certain things would just be hands on still. So I think that's really important. I think um, more the generalists early on who can be able to shift quickly. You don't have to make as much of a bet. They can quickly bounce across multiple channels and tactics to figure out what works. And then I think really important to then kind of consider when you do have channels that work, then you bring in specialists that whether that's in-house or agency, but have the specialists that can really kind of own it and take it to the next level.
Yeah.
And yeah, so all really good stuff there. And then when you, I guess shifting that then a little bit, like where do you think kind of like hiring and team structuring starts to come into the conversation? So obviously I think we talked about it a little bit, but like when you're now talking aspirational, looking at where we are and we want to reach the next stage, and if you want to focus in on going from one specific stage to the next to make it easier, that's fine. But yeah, I would just love to kind of hear some of your thoughts on how you start to think about hiring, timing, what the team structure looks like, to kind of help set people up to reach that next stage.
Yeah. So I've done this exercise before where you build out like the 3 year model, 5 year model.
Mm-hmm.
And it's usually 100% wrong, but it's still actually incredibly valuable because it makes you think just more long term, a lot bigger in terms of what you're doing. And I think it's valuable at any stage to say like, okay, if we're going to get from 1 million to 5 million over the next 3 years, what is that going to look like for us? Because you have to have conversations then around like, do we think we can scale the channel that's working for us to that level, or are we going to need to layer in more channels? And
Yeah.
then back to like the time piece, right? Like too many companies make the mistake of like they build that model for the year, and it's like we need outbound or we need this other channel now, and it's like okay, we'll build outbound this year, and then basically they bake all the numbers of outbound or whatever new channel they're going to do in the second half of the year. And naturally, what happens is it always takes longer than you think. Hiring, building out the team, getting them ramped, all these sorts of things, and then just the learning phase. And then you miss your targets because you didn't give yourself enough time, right? And so I think
Yeah.
part of it is like there needs to be an understanding of like partnerships, affiliates, all these things take a long time to figure out. One, getting in the team, and then two, scaling them and all these sorts of things. So really like doing that exercise of planning out for a few years, the numbers to see kind of like, hey, at the volume we're converting leads today, in order to hit 5 million customers, we need to 5x our leads, or we need to get more efficient with like the follow with the conversions of those leads. We need a higher conversion rate. So what do we need to do to get that right? And maybe it's like, oh, we should have SDRs qualify these people right up front, and that'll help us, right? Like, so you can figure out some of those things of where you should be making those bets, and then you can figure
Yeah.
out like how you hire out for those things. Because yeah, too often if you're just starting the plan at January 1st, and that's like when you deliver the plan to everyone, it's like here's how we're going to grow this year. A lot of times it's just all gets baked into the back half of the year, which is usually a recipe for disaster
Yeah.
because it's too hard to hire and scale and do those things that quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I always talk to people about like the concept of layering, and like I think early on you can kind of like find a channel. We talked about, testing channels, stuff like that. Like you can find something that, goes from generating 0 paying customers a month to, a large substantial number, like a big swing for your company. But that doesn't like keep happening indefinitely. We don't just like stumble upon something you haven't tested in the last 5 years somehow and introduce it, and all of a sudden it's like transformative. It's so much more about like, okay, if I want to get another 100 customers a month, I'm gonna do all of these conversion improvements to add 8 more customers a month, and we're gonna create blog content, and there's going to be 5 posts that each generate 1 customer per month, and like you just kind of keep layering like a referral partner or like recruit affiliates or all these things. It's like 1 or 2 a month here and there. You just keep layering and layering and layering, not spending all of your time trying to find something that goes 0 to 100,
Yep.
or making that bet like you said and banking it all on the back half of the year. So yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I guess the only other thing there would just be kind of your thoughts on like, when you come in with companies and kind of see where they're at, like what's some of the, or maybe it's one or multiple factors that you see that helps you kind of determine like you should hire this in-house, or no, you should go work with an agency. What kind of like helps you make your decision there?
Yeah. So I think it's a couple things. I don't think they have to be exclusive, right? I think you could do both. And so a lot of
Yeah.
times it's like we want to build out a content team, and it's like awesome. That's going to take a little while, right? Between hiring the content lead who's going to set the strategy, and then hiring the writers and doing all these things to get to that level. If we know 90% of the strategy, which most of the times if you talk to someone who's like a founder or whatever, they know 80% and 90% what needs to be done. And so it's
Yeah.
like, let's just get a good agency in here now and then hire someone. And maybe they can just rely on the agency, right? And at a certain point, it just makes sense, right? And if you look at the
Yeah.
cost component of it, it's like, well, yeah, we could go out and hire all these people, but like it would be way more overhead for us for what we're getting from an agency. And a lot of times, you can find really good agencies to do things, like whether it's content or even paid agency, right? Where it's like they're
Mm-hmm.
taking 8% of your spend, and it's like, okay, that stings a little, right? But if you look at it, it's like, okay, we're spending $50,000. Are we going to get anyone who's, fantastic at $4,000 a month with less than $50,000 to manage or paid? Or is like this boutique agency just really good, and this person has way more experience than anyone we could hire individually, right? And so in that case, it's like, yeah, stick with the agency. It makes a lot of sense to do that, right? And so
Yep.
some of it's just the financial modeling of figuring it out, but then also I think agencies can help a ton to shortcut the structure and the frameworks, right? Because one of the big downsides of risk is like if you just try to build it in house and you just try to hire that amazing VP and you think you're going to nail it, most of the times companies don't. And so what happens is like how we talked about speed earlier, how far back are you now delayed because you hired the wrong head of content? And now you have that person in the seat for 6 months before you realize this is a shit show. Like it doesn't work. We need someone else. And now it's like you're back to square one and you've lost half a year. Not just in terms of like that person creating stuff, but like when content or things like that do take time to develop, that's even more impactful of the damage. And so it's like bring in an agency for them to work with, to come in and set the stage that is good. And then, bring in the person on top of that. And so then they can work with the agency directly, and you've laid out a much stronger foundation of things. And you can usually go a lot faster too, which is the other big benefit of working with an agency.
Yes. Yeah, I totally agree. And we definitely hear that a lot from folks who just like, we want to get going quickly. I mean, the number of people I talk to, they're like, I want to start yesterday, like they're just ready. And so, yeah, I think the time to ramp is really important. The breadth of skill sets that you would have to hire in-house. And also, like, we do work with a lot of companies that have one content marketer in-house. Yep. And so content marketing is very broad. And, like I would say a lot of content marketers have advanced their knowledge of SEO and skill sets, but still don't quite have like the full depth of like deep SEO all the way into technical and some of the other stuff. And so it tends to work really well to have an in-house content marketer who knows the brand, sort of sets the tone, the overall vision, and can work across case studies, webinars, podcasts, whatever it might be. And then, we're able to kind of have our lane and create optimized content that helps fuel some of the other things like newsletters and social content and that stuff. But that, and then just really kind of covering the SEO role as well, which would be another expensive, difficult role to hire in-house. So, I think that the combination part is very common that we see for sure.
Yeah. And it's also like you said it there, right? Where it's like a content person or content marketer is not equal, right? Like some of them are way more technical SEO focused content people. Some are more storytelling. You see that with like demand gen too, right? Like this person scaled only through like Facebook and Instagram paid ads. That's very different than someone who knows Google ads or who's run ABM strategies. So like a lot of it when you're talking to these people is understanding like how do you want to grow and like where do they have the skill set and how does that fit in? And maybe you need both. In which case the agency thing is like is awesome to offset whatever they're lacking in terms of skill. Because otherwise you're looking for like a complete like unicorn hire who can kind of do everything in content. And those people generally are very few and far between.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Before we move into the final 4 questions that we ask everybody, anything else you want to say on the topic?
No, I don't think so. I think the biggest thing, right, is focus and speed are kind of the two things, right? Is like you want to move quickly, but also you have to focus enough on like a few things to give it enough time. Because if you're just like speed, like this week we did Facebook ads and next week we're doing this and you don't give anything enough time, which I've also seen, it's like a scattershot approach. You're like, I don't even understand like where we're at with any of this stuff, right? And so you have to give stuff time to mature before you make the decision like, yes, there's something here, or no, there's not. And so I think those are the 2 big mistakes I commonly see companies make.
Yeah, awesome. All right, so moving to the other section, what's a recent success or learning you'd like to share?
Yeah. Um, so this is a good one because I think like with all the AI stuff happening out in the world, like marketers, there's so many different like things you can do with the tools, and so I think one of the recent learnings is kind of goes back to the speed component of how quickly can you stand something up. I'm a big believer of like putting like time constraints around when you decide you're going to do something, right? So if you decide outbound's the thing you want to do, which is a company I work with, was like, well, we should do outbound. We've been talking about it for months, da da da. And it was like these conversations, and I was like, let's launch outbound by the end of the week. And everyone's like, what? Like how are, but I think one of the things is like, it doesn't have to be perfect, but in 2 months from now, we'll have tons of learnings that if we
Yeah.
wait 2 months to build this program out, let's launch something by the end of the week, just like kind of like on a, like you said, like product development side, it's like we're shipping, right? And so like we can continue to add features and things to it. But I think too many people spend months mapping out the ideal state. And so we launched an outbound campaign within a week. And I think part of it is like there's so many cool AI tools and things you can leverage now,
Yeah.
low cost tech, where you can stand up an outbound campaign for $500 from a tech spend standpoint and start seeing results from it. And so I think that was kind of a nice reminder of like if you just what is it? Pomodoro's law, like work expands to fit whatever time you give it. If you give yourself 5 hours to write a blog post, it'll take you 5 hours. If you give yourself an hour, it's going to take an
Yep.
hour. And so it's the same thing with like even like bigger things like an outbound strategy is like just pick and go because most of the time that the next 4 months or whatever you're going to spend debating is debating the 10%, the 90% you actually already know and have agreed upon. So I think that was a good healthy reminder for me this week.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. That's yeah, Parkinson's law
But
is
yeah, okay,
yeah.
yeah. I use
Big
the
fan of that one.
Pomodoro tool or whatever that
Yeah.
time constraints my work level. So yeah.
Yeah. No, that's really cool, and I think just generally a very good reminder. Like progress over perfection. Like just stop talking about it and just do it. That's great. Um, I think this you can answer this one for kind of you for Curtis, or you can ask, or sorry, answer kind of through the lens of some of the companies you work for. But what role does content play in the overall strategy?
Yeah, I would say it. So I can answer for myself because it's kind of interesting. I'm sure most people give like the company answer, so it might be interesting to have an individual. So I'm just a
Yeah.
company of one. For me, content is kind of everything for my business, right? Because so much of what I do and why people hire me is because of there's a perceived level of like, oh, this person knows what they're talking about, they're knowledgeable, there's these kinds of things. I
Hmm.
can't tell you the amount of people who come in off of a LinkedIn post that I put up. And so content to me is not just like blog posts and all these things. It's everything, right? It's a newsletter, it's podcasts, it's all these things, it's social posts. And so when I think of like the content I put out, I run a weekly newsletter and I post on social a couple times a week, and I have 100% inbound usually, and I think
Yeah.
and it's all off of those things, and it happens for a couple of reasons. One is you get to know people way more than you realize. Like, so people come in with like a familiarity around you, which is like kind of weird at first because like it throws you off because it's like, oh, I know Nate. I've heard 5 of his podcasts. Like someone who's listened to
Yeah.
all of your podcasts has a sense for your personality. Like they just know a lot more about you, right? Like
Yeah.
5 hours is a long time to listen to someone speak, right?
Totally. Yeah.
And so I think that you can build up a connection with a much wider group of people than you normally could not doing content, right? Because like people want to engage with other people and want to engage with this sort of stuff. And so for me, it's like it's basically like outside of like delivering on what I actually do, that is like the number two thing I think about is like
Yeah.
what kind of content can I make that would be interesting? What should I write about in my newsletter? Like I spend like a ton of time doing that and engaging with other people's content. So it's a huge driver for me personally.
Yeah. Awesome. Um, and then again, kind of for you or clients, either one. How do you define success? Like for you, for your team. Obviously, it's just you and the company, but for a client, how would you define success for them and the team, or if it's for you, then kind of how do you define success?
Yeah. Are you asking specifically around content or just in
Overall? Yeah.
overall? Yeah. I mean, most of the time, right, companies are in business to make money. So usually it's a
Yeah.
revenue metric. But I think it's important to have milestones along the way, right? It's just not just have the annual goal of we want to grow 50%. You need to celebrate the wins along the way. Because you might not always end up at the 50%, but if you actually like look at it with some perspective, usually what you see is like, wow, look how far we came in the last 6 months or the last 4 months or whatever it might be. So I'm a big believer of having like almost like monthly goals, the quarterly goals, like the annual goals, and then you don't live and die by like the monthly goals, but you should be celebrating where you're having wins within the team, like
Yeah.
even on the individual channels, right? If you're Facebook, inbound killed it this month. Like you should be celebrating that, and it's okay to celebrate the person who did that, even if you missed on the overall month. And I'm not saying like you
Yeah.
go out and like brag the sales, like oh we crushed it on Facebook when the company missed their goal. But there has to be a level of like progress that's happening because startups are hard, and
Yep.
usually people set super aggressive goals with zero like context as to why. It's just like what is it, the double double or triple triple double double like seven. It's like there's really no logic behind that in some cases. So it's like we're gonna triple this year, and it's like, and that's said regardless of anything that's in place. And so that's awesome if you can hit that, but like don't knock yourself down if you just only double, right? And so I think
Totally.
like
Yeah.
a lot of companies I think can get hung up in that like crazy growth mode, and they don't celebrate the smaller things. So to me, success is like, are you working on stuff that is enjoyable to you to work on, and then like are you actually having fun doing it, right? Because
Yep.
it's marketing, and we're not, it's not brain surgery. It should be like a fun activity. People want to engage with
Yeah.
fun brands, they want all these things. So like if you're not enjoying what you're doing, to me that's like the biggest red flag of not success.
Yep. Yeah. I love all that. It's great. Great perspective for sure. All right. And then lastly, what's your least favorite marketing conversation happening in social channels right now and why?
My least favorite has got to be the dark social talk. And why? It's just to me, it's nothing new. It's just a rebrand. It's word of mouth, right? Like we talk about
Yeah.
social, like oh, people are talking on Slack channels, and people are doing, pinging people on social to say what tools you use. And it's like, yeah, I did that 10 years ago when I would grab coffee with Nate. I would say like, hey, what tools do you use? Or if I'm at a trade show, I would ask people. Like, that's not anything new in terms of the way people buy.
Right.
So it feels like this very like trendy topic people like to talk about. When the reality is like it's buyer behavior, and that actually hasn't changed at all. It's word of mouth. It's pretty much what it is, and your reputation, right? And so to me, that's like a topic I just find like exhausting, because
Yeah.
everyone seems like they love to talk about it like it's some new novel concept, and it's not.
Yeah. Yep.
Good
Yeah.
marketing though.
I'm with you on that. Um, cool. Well, this has been really great for anyone who wants to learn more about you and what you're doing with your business. Where should they look?
Yeah, just find me on LinkedIn, follow me there. I post a lot of my content there. You can reach out to me there. That's probably the best spot.
Okay. Awesome. All right. And then if you want to check out any other episodes, please visit 10speed.io/podcast. You can get all prior episodes available there. Please like and subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. All right. Well, thanks, Adam, for joining. And until next time, we will wrap it up today.
All right, thanks for having me, Nate.